From the historic campus of Hillsdale College in Hillsdale, Michigan, where the good, the true, and the beautiful are taught, nurtured, and honored, this is the Radio Free Hillsdale Hour, bringing the activity and education of the college to listeners across the country.
They prioritize their own interests to stay at home and work in their pajamas at the expense of millions of children, and that hurt kids in a lot of ways, mentally, physically, socially, and emotionally. But the silver lining was that families got to see what was happening in the classroom.
This is your host, Scot Bertram. Welcome to the Radio Free Hillsdale Hour, part of the Hillsdale College Podcast Network. That was Dr. Corey DeAngelis, author of the new book, The Parent Revolution, Rescuing Your Kids from the Radicals Ruining Our Schools. We'll talk in depth with Corey DeAngelis about that book a little bit later on in today's program. First, we're joined by Dr. Kathleen O'Toole. Dr. O'Toole is Assistant Provost for K-12 Education at Hillsdale College. Dr. O'Toole, thanks for joining us.
Hey, thanks for having me.
We are talking today about a recent essay you wrote over at the Washington Examiner, WashingtonExaminer.com, The Hidden Barrier to School Choice. We've talked in the past, and I've talked with some of our K-12 leaders as well. One of the toughest tasks for any new charter is finding space, finding facilities for that school. Why is that such a challenge generally?
Yeah, it's an amazing thing, and it's not something that you would expect to be as much of a challenge as it is. When we work with a founding group, they're rightly focused on the most important things, finding a finding a leader for the school. I mean, after all, that's the most important thing. Mm-hmm. And then thinking about attracting families, if it's a private school or a charter, and then thinking about putting together the charter application, getting approval from the state. But often school groups that surmount those heavy obstacles are faced by a third that they did not expect to be so difficult. Mm-hmm. Where are we actually going to have this school? And we have seen many groups hit almost a brick wall through their search for a brick building in which to find a place to have class. And many times they have to settle for splitting the campus across two different facilities, or doing heavy construction on a building, heavy remodeling on a building that wasn't intended to be in a school in the first place. And almost none of them are in a position to think about a thing that we love to think about and need to think about in classical education, creating a space which is conducive to learning. Mm-hmm. That is a luxury when it really shouldn't be.
Unfortunately, there are some governing bodies that are making that task even more difficult, and that's the theme of your essay over at WashingtonExaminer.com. How are they doing that? What's becoming tougher for some of these schools?
Well, facilities funding for charter schools, even though they are public schools, does not generally match the funding that's available to traditional public schools. And so although these classical schools, which are charters, are providing a superior education with a much stronger curriculum, a much better educated and, on the whole, very talented faculty, and although in many cases their results are just off the charts amazing, they don't look on the surface like the precious places that they are, because they have less to work with when it comes to the facilities. In my old school, the landscaping was done by an Eagle Scout who was in our first graduating class, and we had a community cleanup day to, get the grass cleaned up and trim the weeds and things, and it looked nice, but it wasn't what it could have been.
Right.
And so there's a disparity when it comes to funding for charters. On top of that, many of these schools face a lot of politicized opposition, a lot of political battling on the way to opening. And even if they are able to obtain a charter and prove to the state that they are going to meet and exceed the standards and that they can be trusted to do an excellent job, they face a lot of smaller opposition on the back end from whoever the powers that be are, and it really varies per state. So it's a real shame and something that I think people are not attuned to.
Talking with Dr. Kathleen O'Toole, Assistant Provost for K-12 Education at Hillsdale College. Indiana and California are among two states that actually have laws that require school districts in the state to sell or lease to charters empty buildings in the district, buildings that are meant to house education. Are there local districts that are still finding ways to prevent that from happening?
There are. I know of a couple in particular. So there's been a massive exodus of public school children from public schools. More than 11,000 traditional public schools have shut down in the last decade. And that means that there are many, many empty school buildings. Orange County Classical Academy is a Hillsdale-affiliated school in Orange County, California. It has 1,000 students on the waiting list. And last year, it could not provide a 9th grade to its 8th grader students who had completed the grade because there wasn't space. There are many, many places nearby, including an adjoining school where those students could have gone to 9th grade. But the forces that be prevented that school from continuing to serve those kids. They're working hard on finding a plan for this coming year, but they're still at risk. And it's just a really disappointing thing because families want this. The teachers and the community want nothing more than to be able to have a couple of extra classrooms to teach those kids the Iliad and let them continue their Latin. Their results at that school are off the charts. And it's just politics, you know.
Here in Michigan, where we are, I've been watching this case where a school district apparently would rather demolish a historic building, a 100-year-old school building. They'd rather tear it down and raise it than sell it to a charter school. One school district member in that district in Michigan said, "We simply cannot afford to have the building become a competing school." Is that the kind of thinking and attitude that often charters are banging their heads against in these areas?
Yeah, I think among public school educators, especially those that are administrators or not the teachers so much themselves, but the movers and shakers in the traditional public school system, I think there's often an attitude that charters are encroaching upon the territory of the traditional public schools. And I think that approach is really misguided. Charter schools were created in the 90s as an effort to create centers of innovation within publicly funded American schools, to give schools a little bit of freedom to experiment with different curriculum, with different teaching techniques. And then the public school system could respond if something was discovered in the charter school world that made sense. Well, if you look at classical charter schools, the ones that Hillsdale run and others across the country, on average, they have long waiting lists. They have very high student and faculty retention. They get excellent results on the standardized tests, even though they are not merely seeking to do well on those tests. So it's clear that these charter schools have figured something out. And to be precise, they haven't invented something. They've just remembered something that we used to know in American education. And so I would think that anyone who cares about the education of America's children could look at these schools and think, wait a minute, what are they doing? And how can we benefit from that? How can we learn from that? But unfortunately, what you see is competitiveness instead. Now, it's not really about us versus them, charter versus public. It's about serving students well. And who are the people who know best about that? Well, it's the parents and the guardians of the students. And so states are cottoning on to the idea that they should just let those people who know and love the child best be in the driver's seat. And schools that have passed charter legislation and other educational choice legislation have been able to do so because of, I think, a correct idea that the families will choose what is best.
Dr. Kathleen O'Toole with us, Assistant Provost for K-12 Education at Hillsdale College. Why is this so important for teachers and parents and students? Why do we want to have those 8th graders become 9th graders in the same school? Why is a single location better than a dual location campus? Why is it important that it perhaps is a building designed for education and not a former office building, something like that? Why is that so important?
Well, one of the core principles at the heart of the Barney Charter School Initiative, which was started in 2010, was that the schools we start are going to be K-12 schools. Now, that sounds a little bit strange as a first principle, but if you think about it, it makes a lot of sense. Mm-hmm. The education that students receive in a Hillsdale-affiliated school is a cohesive plan that begins when the child is 5 and concludes when the child is 18. And everything that happens along the way is carefully planned across the grade level and up and down the grade levels. If that student's experience is cut off before the entire K through 12 sequence has gone, something significant is missing. Some significant opportunity to revisit something or to build upon prior knowledge has been taken away from the student. Now, it's true, not every student is going to begin in kindergarten and go all the way to 12th grade, but that's the ideal. Mm-hmm. And every family should have the opportunity to choose that if that is what they choose for their children. And so when there's a barrier to the high school curriculum and the high school experience, which the entire kindergarten through 8th grade sequence has been anticipating, that is just a tragedy. Now, when you have a school on 2 campuses, it makes sense. It doesn't seem like a compromise to most people who are used to sending their children to school, because we think K through 5, 6 through 8, 9 through 12 in this country. And we assume that there's going to be a change of location along the way. But that's a little bit artificial. And it means that students' milestones for growing up or for marking their progress are not the core things. And so it's better if it's on one campus. If you, the 6th grader, can look at the 10th graders and see that they're doing something similar, right, but a little bit deeper, and then look forward to that.
Final question for Dr. Kathleen O'Toole. How can we encourage, what can we do to help more charters start rather than shutting them down before they even open?
I would say give them a chance. You know, look, if people at the policymaker level should pay attention to barriers for charters opening and not assume outright that they are trying to do a different kind of thing than traditional public schools, because they shouldn't really. They should be able to meet the same standards, and they should be able to demonstrate excellence. And Hillsdale schools do that very much so. Also, I think we should be thinking about the quality or the nature of the places in which our children are going to school. My sister is a classical architect, and so I've been learning a lot from her about why classical architecture, why the right proportions, why the right size of door frame and window feels better and is more conducive to higher human activity than a depressing old building with low ceilings. It's not merely an aesthetic thing. It is better to learn in a place that is built for the activity of learning. And so, you know, really, we should be having a conversation about the appearance of the places in which we send our children to school and what we can do to bring beauty and order into their environment to help them with learning. But for now, we'll settle for enough space.
Yeah. Dr. Kathleen O'Toole, Assistant Provost for K-12 Education at Hillsdale College. You can find more at k12.hillsdale.edu, and her piece, The Hidden Barrier to School Choice, can be found at washingtonexaminer.com. Dr. O'Toole, thanks for joining us here on the Radio Free Hillsdale Hour.
Thanks for having me.
Up next, Corey DeAngelis joins us. We'll talk in depth about his book, The Parent Revolution. I'm Scot Bertram. This is the Radio Free Hillsdale Hour.
Hillsdale College is a small, Christian, classical liberal arts college that operates independently of government funding, and we want you or your son or daughter to apply. At Hillsdale, students grow in heart and mind by studying timeless truths in a supportive community dedicated to the highest things. Hillsdale College costs significantly less than other nationally ranked private liberal arts colleges and receives regular recognition as a best value, and nearly all students receive financial aid. Our robust core curriculum, vibrant student life, and 8-to-1 student-to-faculty ratio make for an education like no other. For more information or to fill out an application, visit hillsdale.edu/info. That's hillsdale.edu/info.
Welcome back to the Radio Free Hillsdale Hour. I'm Scot Bertram. Follow us on X for updated show releases and guest information. We're at Hillsdale Radio. We're joined by Dr. Corey DeAngelis. He is Senior Fellow at the American Federation for Children, a Visiting Fellow at the Hoover Institution, and the author of the new book, The Parent Revolution, Rescuing Your Kids from the Radicals Ruining Our Schools. Corey, thanks so much for joining us.
Hey, Scott, thanks for having me.
People might be aware of you from your online presence on X at DeAngelis Corey, which has been ramped up in recent years. You explain early on in the Parent Revolution how you became interested in schools and education and school choice. And there's a line in which you say, I reached an inflection point when I decided to dedicate myself to social media. How did that change the course of your work in education?
Yeah, I actually started as a researcher at the University of Arkansas. I did my PhD in education policy. So, Scott, I'm not a real doctor. I'm more like a Jill Biden doctor. I can't help you with medical issues, but I could help you with a math problem. But no, I actually started by researching school choice programs. One of the oldest in the country was actually in Milwaukee. I followed the students' data over time, by the time they were 25 to 30 years of age, and found that using a scholarship to go to a private or religious school led to substantial reductions in crime later on in life after controlling for tons of background characteristics across sectors. More school choice, less crime. Not very surprising to school choice advocates because families choose their schools based on safety, the culture of the school, and being able to send their kid to an institution that is good at developing character, that aligns with their values. And so it shouldn't surprise us all that much that getting to go to a school that works better for your kid could improve things that aren't measured by standardized test scores. Mm-hmm. So that's how I really got into this. I first experienced school choice in growing up in San Antonio, Texas. I went to government schools all through K through 12, but in high school I had the opportunity to go to a magnet school that you're not assigned to. They don't have as much monopoly power. They have to cater to the needs of their customers and attract their clientele. That was a good opportunity for me, and I talk about that a little bit in the book, and I think other families should have educational opportunities as well. But I really turned the switch into advocacy when I moved into think tanks. I started at Cato Institute, I'm now at AFC, and a lot of people told me to stay off Twitter because I could be doing more important things like writing 50-page articles, and I've done a ton of those. I've published about 40 peer-reviewed articles, and I'm glad I didn't listen to the advice of the academics because you can be a lot more influential in social media, on the radio, on TV. You obviously need science. You need the data, and I still do studies from time to time. Mm-hmm. But most people, not even the reviewers, will read your 50-page articles. You need to be able to distill those points into sound bites, especially for politicians.
If social media is an inflection point for you and your work, the school closures around COVID in 2020 and unfortunately stretching into 2021, 2022 seems to be an inflection point for parents and the school choice movement. How did teachers' unions use their power to influence those school closures, and what did parents begin to realize?
Yeah, the teachers' unions held children's education hostage to secure multiple multi-billion-dollar ransom payments from taxpayers. They knew they could leverage the closures as an argument for why they needed more money, but not just more money. They called for police-free schools. They wanted wealth tax, Medicare for all. They included all their socialist demands that they wanted before in their arguments for demands for things they needed in order to open the schools for families and kids. It was a hostage-taking scenario at a large scale, and their plan worked at first. They got $190 billion in so-called COVID relief since March of 2020, but their plan quickly backfired in that families, through remote learning, which, look, we should have just called it remotely learning. There wasn't a lot of learning going on. Mm-hmm. But families got to see through the government Zoom school that was not very, they got to see that the schools didn't care all that much about them. They prioritized their own interests to stay at home and work in their pajamas at the expense of millions of children, and that hurt kids in a lot of ways, mentally, physically, socially, and emotionally. But the silver lining was that families got to see what was happening in the classroom. So you had parents who thought their kids were in good schools based on their test scores started to see that there was something else going on. The schools were focusing more on indoctrination, especially left-wing radical indoctrination with CRT, Marxist ideology, and gender ideology in the schools as well, and they weren't focusing on the basics, math, reading, and writing. And so that sparked a parent revolution, so much that I actually dedicated the book to Randy Weingarten of the AFT Teachers Union and the rest of the union cronies all across the country for overplaying their hand and inadvertently doing more to advance the concepts of school choice and homeschooling than anyone could have ever imagined, because we now have 11 states, red states, that have gone all in on school choice. No picking winners and losers. Everybody can take their kids' education money to the public, private, charter, or homeschool that works best for them. Before 2021, we had 0 states with Milton Friedman's vision of universal school choice for everybody. Now we have 11. That is a lot of momentum in a very short amount of time, and the revolution's just getting started. It was sparked by the unions, and families have woken up. They're never going to unsee what they saw in 2020, and the parents have basically become a new interest group, if you will, that is more powerful than the employees in the system.
Corey, the unions themselves, in some ways, it's understandable what they do, because their responsibility is not necessarily to the students. The responsibility of a union is to its members. So how do we allow unions, and in particular, like CTU in Chicago, to accumulate so much power and to dictate how our children are educated?
They get to extract resources from the taxpayer involuntarily each and every year. I mean, we spend about $700 billion in K-12 education each year. It's extorted from the taxpayer, whether you like it or not. And we spend about $20,000 per kid per year in the government school system, whereas average private school tuition for K-12 is only about $12,000 per year. But that money gets funneled to the teachers' unions, and 99.9% of that money that gets funneled to the teachers' unions of their campaign contributions go towards Democrat campaign coffers. So it's basically a money laundering operation. It ought to be illegal. Randy Weingarten's union, AFT, if you look at Open Secret's website, it has the data on this. 99.97% of her union's campaign contributions in 2022 went to Democrats. So you have Democrats basically being arm of the Democratic Party, of the teachers' unions. And it's a really incestuous relationship, and it makes it so that they fight as hard as possible against any change to the status quo. They try to fight to protect the monopoly at the expense of parents. And the problem is that the unions are public sector. I don't have a problem with private sector unions, because if they do a bad job in the private sector, guess what? Families can vote with their feet. Well, in the public sector, with the teachers' unions, they closed the schools, and families were the ones that felt the pain from those, basically, the strikes over the COVID era, and any other strike for that matter. The families feel the pain. In what other industry does the customer feel the pain when the union messes up? So this is the problem with public sector unions, and I think the best accountability mechanism for when the union, like in Chicago, when they deleted a tweet saying that the push to reopen schools was rooted in racism, sexism, and misogyny, they threw every buzzword at the wall to see what would stick. Their hypocrisy was never ending. They were vacationing in Puerto Rico, their board member, while railing against going back to work during COVID. And the best accountability is to say, hey, that money shouldn't go to close the buildings. It shouldn't go to unions or adults. It should follow the child to the school that works best for them, and that will give the public schools and their unions an incentive to actually cater to the needs of families. And I think I would argue it would actually help the teachers, too, because they serve just the lowest common denominator at this point. They protect the worst actors in the system, and the unions funnel money towards hiring more people as opposed to raising salaries for the teachers that are already doing a good job in the system. If you look at the money over time, we've increased per student spending in public schools by about 170% since 1970 in real terms. But the teacher salaries have only gone up by about 10% in real terms over the same period. The money goes towards administrative bloat. It doesn't go to the families. It certainly doesn't go to the kids. But competition leads more of that money going into the classroom, which helps everybody.
Talking with Corey DeAngelis, his new book, The Parent Revolution, Rescuing Your Kids from the Radicals Ruining Our Schools. You are specific in The Parent Revolution about language, public schools versus referring to them as government schools. Why should we be so explicit about our language choices?
Well, the left does this all the time, right? They shape discourse by changing the definitions of words, and framing is really important in public debates, especially when we're talking about politics, because in politics, if you're explaining, you're losing, and so you need to be really good at framing the debate. Voters listen to sound bites, and so do politicians. So when it comes to government schools versus public schools, I would argue that they're government schools. They are run by the government. They're operated by the government. They're funded by the government, or at least the taxpayer. They are compelled by the government. They are signed by the government, by your residents, and they're not public in any meaningful sense of the word. They're not like a public park that anybody can access it. Families have actually gone to jail for lying about their address to get into better so-called public schools. They can expel students, obviously. They're not a public good based on the economic definition. They are rivalrous and excludable. They discriminate on the basis of zip code and other ways as well. So they're government schools. It's a more accurate description. And look, if the truth hurts, if you get a knee-jerk reaction about that reality, that tells you more about the problem than anything else. Why does it make you feel bad that the government runs the schools? Well, one, because people know that the government sucks at about just about everything that it does. And two, we are forced to send our kids to government schools and spend taxpayer money on sending our children to those government schools. So that those are two facts that people don't like to admit. And it really exposes why we should fund the student and not the system. The parents should get to decide. I mean, with food stamps, do we tell families they have to take that money to a government-assigned, government-run grocery store? No, we don't do that. We don't do that with college scholarships, Pell Grants.
Right.
You can take that money to a public or private school. We should do the same thing with K through 12 and fund people and fund students, not systems.
Corey DeAngelis with us, his book, The Parent Revolution, Rescuing Your Kids from the Radicals Ruining Our Schools. There is a line in The Parent Revolution that jumped out to me, in which you write, the past several years have demonstrated the more effective argument for school choice is focused on values rather than performance. So what does that look like moving forward?
Yeah, I mean, we've made the argument in a very compelling way for a long time that there are some kids in areas that have objectively failing government school education, where they have low test scores. In Baltimore, for example, you have dozens of schools that have 0% proficiency rates. Not a single kid in those schools can proficiently do math, and that's a huge problem, and it's a good argument for school choice. But what the parent revolution has illuminated over the past few years is that families really care about a lot of things, and it's not just test scores. They want to send their kid to an institution that's aligned with their values. They don't want their kid to be brainwashed with radical left ideology, and that has mobilized parents like we've never seen before. And it's not just low-income parents that are assigned to schools with lefty ideology. It's parents from all backgrounds. So this created a broader coalition, getting to see what was happening in the classroom and lifting the curtain up and shining a spotlight on the rot in the government education system has led to a more politically advantaged coalition of families, a more widespread coalition of parents pushing for school choice. And lo and behold, that is what has led to this parent revolution where we're seeing school choice winning so much, Scott, that I'm almost getting tired of winning in red states at least. We're not done yet in blue states. We need to get there. And so I think that's really what has caused a lot of the momentum. And it's because, look, parents care about a lot of things. They care about test scores. They care about academics, but they choose schools based on safety, culture, discipline in the schools, whether they're going to be around gangs or drugs in the school as well. And these are all important things to families that will lead to outcomes in the long run, like I studied at the very beginning of my career, seeing that school choice reduced crime. There have been other studies showing school choice reducing teenage pregnancies, improving political participation and tolerance of others' views. We can actually have a more cohesive society by getting to choose a school that teaches logic as opposed to dividing people based on immutable characteristics like race and gender.
People who follow you on X at DeAngelis, Corey, have seen your work in various states in pushing forward school choice legislation. And there's a step-by-step, 4-step process that's outlined inside the Parent Revolution to how to make that happen. But I'm curious about, it's Texas, it's Tennessee, they're red states that this work is happening in. Why is it sometimes more difficult to get these policies moving in what should be friendly territory?
Well, unions are stupid in a lot of ways, but they're smart politically sometimes in that in purplish states or blue states, they go all in for the Democrats because their best bet is to get a Democrat majority to block school choice because it's not on their party platform to support it. But in deep red states, they know they're not going to get a Democrat majority. So they may support some Democrats, but they go in real heavy in the Republican primaries to elect rhinos, fake Republicans who seem like they're conservative on other issues, but will vote in lockstep with the unions, these radical left institutions, so that they can block school choice in at least one chamber. This is the case in Texas. 18 of the 21 so-called Republicans who voted against school choice, guess what? They were endorsed by the state affiliate of the NEA, the same Texas State Teachers Association that tweeted out, or at least put on Facebook, Happy Trans Awareness Day on Easter this year. And so recently, however, these unions have started to quietly support the Republicans. They made zero public endorsements of these Republicans this year. They did it in 2022 before the vote. But now there are zero endorsements for Republicans from the AFT or the NEA affiliate in Texas. And that tells me that's good news. The political winds are shifting towards school choice and away from the teachers' unions' evil ideology. And basically, the teachers' union endorsement is becoming the political kiss of death in Republican primaries, at least. And in Texas, there was a political earthquake that unfolded on Super Tuesday. It was a political bloodbath. 10 of the 13 incumbents who voted against school choice that were targeted by my organization, the American Federation for Children, and our Super PAC, 10 of the 13 that we targeted who voted against school choice either lost their election outright or they were forced into runoff, and most of them were forced into runoffs in second place, which translates to a 77% victory rate against anti-school choice incumbents. And look, Scott, you know this, but for listeners, that's basically impossible. Incumbents win about 95% of their time. They have name recognition, they have funding advantages, and we basically inverted that trend in Texas. So you can't tell me that rural voters don't support school choice. I mean, we beat Glenn Rogers. Voters came out and beat him by 27% on the issue of school choice. This was the number one dividing line in all of these races, whether they supported school choice or not. And so the same thing happened in Iowa after they killed it in 2022. The primaries happened. They got a new House, passed universal school choice in 2023, and it's looking like we've won enough races to pass universal school choice in Texas as well. But the argument is ridiculous. They'll say, on the one hand, I don't need to vote for this because I'm in a rural area, even though, look, rural voters on polls do support school choice, even at a higher amount than urban voters. But they'll say, look, we don't have any private schools here. The public school is the only option. And then the next breath, they'll try to say that giving families a choice will defund or destroy their fantastic rural public school. Well, one, if it's so fantastic, there's nothing to worry about. And two, if there's no exit options, like you say, then you shouldn't be worried at all. Where are the people going to go? Where are they going to take the money? If it's true, there's no options, you should be the last person arguing this is going to defund your school. But the thing is, it's always just been an excuse for them to have their cake and eat it too, to cave to special interest as opposed to their constituents.
Corey DeAngelis with us. His book, The Parent Revolution, is out now. The book runs down successes in West Virginia and Arizona and elsewhere, Iowa, as you mentioned. The very last chapter, the conclusion, The Parent Revolution continues with some tips and advice. I wanted to finish by asking about something that is a little under the radar, making school boards transparent and accountable. And a lot of this, Corey, has to do with when and how those school board elections are held. What do people need to know?
Yeah, most people don't know this, but school board elections are usually at random times, not with the general election. And the reason that is the case because the teachers' unions want it that way. They want low turnout so that their special interest will be able to determine the outcome of the election. They can handpick socialists to put into the school boards and to pass bonds for more money if it's at a random time, because then you get 5% turnout and they can have an outsized influence on the outcome of those elections. The same people saying that Republicans are a threat to democracy and that they're trying to suppress voters, these are the same people that when it comes to K-12 education, they try to make as low turnout as possible. Just try it in your area. Try to tell them that they should fight to make the school board election aligned with the general election to increase voter turnout, to have more democracy, and they will fight against it. They're total hypocrites because they want power. They want control. They want to be the ones to protect their monopoly on money, but they also want to have a monopoly on the minds of other people's children. In a way, the left doesn't even have to have kids anymore, and they'll still be able to shift American culture through the school system. They've infiltrated the government schools, and they know they have millions and millions and millions of kids being churned through that factory model school system each year, and if they control it, well, then they can have an outside influence on the direction of our country. Conservatives can't win this battle just by having more kids. We need to take back control of the school system. We need to have the money follow the child. And The Parent Revolution, my new book, has several examples, especially in the conclusion, of not just how to fight for school choice, but how to tweak the current system to give us a better fighting chance at winning back our country and our schools from these radicals that are ruining America, or at least trying to do so by controlling the education system. I think we're going to win this war. We have the solutions laid out in the book, but there are a lot of signs for optimism in the book as well about how we're actually winning in a lot of red states already.
Corey DeAngelis is Senior Fellow at the American Federation for Children. He is Visiting Fellow at the Hoover Institution, and the new book is available now, The Parent Revolution, Rescuing Your Kids from the Radicals Ruining Our Schools. Also follow on X at DeAngelis Corey. Corey, thanks so much for joining us here on the Radio Free Hillsdale Hour.
Absolutely. Thank you, Scott.
Up next, Dr. Kelly Scott Franklin from Hillsdale's English Department joins us for a great moment in the great books. I'm Scot Bertram. This is the Radio Free Hillsdale Hour.
Whether you've just started teaching or spent decades in the classroom, you know there's always more to learn. But where do you start? Well, here at Hillsdale College, we have the answer for you. Tried and True, a primer on sound pedagogy by Hillsdale College professor Daniel Copeland. In this little book, you'll read lessons from more than 25 years of Dr. Copeland's classroom experience. It's all distilled into 14 easy-to-read chapters on lesson planning, assignments, and classroom management, and it will help you improve your skills and inspire you as a teacher, one of our most important professions. Whether you've been in front of the classroom for years or this is your first year, when you read Tried and True, you'll find something to help you keep improving every single day. You don't need to go at it alone. Let Dr. Copeland's real-world experience encourage you and inspire you. You can get your copy today at hillsdale.edu/true. That's hillsdale.edu/TRUE. Thanks for listening.
Welcome back to the Radio Free Hillsdale Hour. I'm Scot Bertram. We invite you to join us on the Hillsdale College Podcast Network. That's podcast.hillsdale.edu for older episodes of this program, plus more great Hillsdale College audio. We're joined by Dr. Kelly Scott Franklin, Associate Professor of English here at Hillsdale College. Dr. Franklin, thanks for joining us.
Hi, Scott. Good to be here.
We are back again for more of this series, Great Moments in the Great Books. And today we look at Moby Dick and the beginning sections of Moby Dick, etymology and extracts. So for a lot of readers, these two beginning sections are things that they might want to skip. Why do you now call these great moments?
Yeah, I love teaching these because I love the challenge of it. And you'll find if you pick up an edition of Moby Dick, I saw a beautiful illustrated edition where the editors just cut extra etymology and extract. They just cut it out altogether and illustrated the rest of the book. So it really is this is a tough start. It's a hard start for readers. Let's start with etymology. I think that both of these sections are very important to understanding the rest of the novel, and they really begin our journey toward the whale, toward understanding the whale. And I think we have to look very carefully because Melville wants us to see some things.
Let's start with etymology then. What's in this section? And again, why is it a great moment in Moby Dick?
My students might have to be persuaded that this is a great moment, but this is one of my favorite places in the book. Etymology, that is the origins and meanings of words, right? The genealogy of a word, where it comes from. And let's just look at how Melville starts the novel. He gives us this section called etymology, and then he tells us it's supplied by a late consumptive usher to a grammar school. This is a joke. This is, if we want to think about who this is, so number one, he's dead. Number two, he had the consumption, so he was gradually wasting away from tuberculosis, which is not funny, but I think Melville's trying to be darkly funny. To a grammar school, that is, he's not the teacher, he's the usher. He's the assistant teacher. He's like maybe a student teacher, but he's old and dying of consumption, and we're told that he is pale, that he's threadbare in coat, heart, body, and brain, and that he was ever dusting his old lexicons and grammars with a queer handkerchief, mockingly embellished with all the gay flags of all the known nations of the world. So I like to ask my students, well, why do we need to know this about his handkerchief? Well, his handkerchief has the flags of the world because he's probably never been anywhere in the world. He is a consumptive usher in a grammar school. And so we begin the novel as far removed from the real whale as we possibly can be. We start not even with the words, not even with the word, but the etymology of the word. That is the origin of the word. And we start with an usher who's dead at a grammar school. The journey that we take in the novel of Moby Dick is a journey of greater and greater. We're journeying towards the whale, and we're going to get up close and personal with Moby Dick by the end. So, but Melville begins us at the farthest bird's eye remove from the whale. So that's really the first thing, this usher and his etymologies. But when we look closer at the etymology that he does give us, it also reveals some really kind of amazing things about the whale. First, he says, while you take in hand to school others, this is a quote from a guy named Hakluyt, While you take in hand to school others and to teach them by what name a whalefish is to be called in our tongue, leaving out, through ignorance, the letter H, which almost alone maketh up the signification of the word, you deliver that which is not true. Again, Melville's joking, but he pulls this quote that if you don't pronounce the in whale, if you don't say whale, then you're not speaking the truth. This is an allusion to the book of Revelation, chapter 22, verse 19, where we read, if any man shall take away from the words of the book of this prophecy, God shall take away his part out of the book of life. Okay, that's very high stakes. Again, Melville's joking, and often if he's using biblical allusions, there's a bit of humor there. Mm-hmm. But if you leave any detail out about the whale, you're missing something, and something with kind of cosmic stakes. So that's the first thing. We've got to understand that understanding the whale fully in every one of its details is crucial to our journey. The next thing is that he gives us two etymologies that contradict one another. We have whale, this is from Webster's, whale, Swedish and Danish, hval. This animal is named from the roundness or rolling, for in Danish, hvalt is arched or vaulted. And then he gives us Richardson's dictionary, where he says, it is more immediately from the Dutch and German, wallen, as in wallowain, to roll or to wallow. I'm not a linguist here, so I can't speak to the subtleties of German, Dutch, Swedish, and Danish. But the point is, right from page one, this is literally page one of the novel, we have contradictory accounts, conflicting accounts about the whale. Which one is it? Even the name of the whale, even the word has a certain amount of mystery. You're going to get conflicting accounts about the whale. What kind of a creature is it? How does it really act? What is it capable of? And Melville's signaling that to us, even humorously in this these two contradictory etymologies. And then the last little section of etymology is a list of a number of words, about a dozen words in about a dozen languages he gives us for the word whale. Hebrew, Greek, Latin, Anglo-Saxon, Danish, Dutch, Swedish, Icelandic, English, French, Spanish, Fiji, and Aromangoan. Readers and listeners still, and my students are like, why are we reading a list of all the different words for the name whale in all these different languages? Mm-hmm. Well, every culture and every language, Melville is signaling to us, has a word for whale. This creature is known across the globe, and it's known in ancient times, right? You have ancient Hebrew, ancient Greek, ancient Latin, and it's known in modern times. Okay, so Fiji and Aromangoan, Spanish, French, English, these are modern languages still spoken in Melville's day. And then there's one last wonderful little, I think, jab from Melville, and that is he lists Fiji and Aromangoan right alongside the biblical and classical languages and the languages of European literature and culture. For Melville, these Polynesian or South Pacific languages rank alongside Greek, Latin, Hebrew, French, Spanish, English, that there is a dignity and a power, and he wants to include those languages and those peoples in this list. It's part of Moby Dick's incredible kind of democratizing project. And you see that throughout the novel, mm-hmm. that Melville is very interested in unusual and otherwise marginalized people, places, and elevating their dignity and drawing out what's epic about them, what's great about them, what's beautiful about them. So, and all of that is, we're one page into the novel. You could see, I tell my students, but we've gotten halfway through our first class and we've talked about page one. We're probably on track to finish the novel sometime by 2028. But that, you can see all of that when we read carefully. Even this kind of non-starter for a first page is really illuminating.
Talking with Dr. Kelly Scott Frankfurt about the great moments in the great books, Moby Dick. That's etymology. What about the much longer extracts? What's in this section and why is it great?
Well, Melville moves from etymologies into what he calls extracts, that is, little passages of literature, history, philosophy, theology, popular songs, any text he can find that has anything to say about the whale. And it's quite long. It's a number of pages, and this is another one of those places where students are it's like we're bogged down before we even get started. Why does Melville give us these extracts? Well, he's doing a similar thing to that opening page in that he tells us these extracts were supplied by a sub-librarian. And then we look at the first extract he gives us. He begins, unsurprisingly, at the beginning and gives us a passage from Genesis. And God created great whales. On the one hand, this is the Old Testament account of the first moments in time, so that's a great place to begin. But it also tells us something about whales. Who made whales and where do they come from? God did. And human beings have the hubris to think they're going to go out and hunt that whale, but they generally get demolished. And so that you can start to see that in the extracts that Melville draws. The other thing we see that I think is really important is that these extracts are taken from every genre. That is, poetry, plays, fiction, chronicles, journals, sacred scripture, popular songs. And they're from all different cultures, they're from all different eras. And so just as the etymology section signals to us the whale is universal, we also see that the whale is universal in every genre of literature, every kind of text, every human endeavor is filled with a searching after the whale. And I think that tells us something. When we start to read the novel, we start to see that because the whale was created by God, and the whale is often depicted as this kind of divine agent, it tells us that every culture, every genre, every writer, in every era, is seeking to understand the whale. That is, seeking to understand in some way God, who God is, what he has done, how the universe works. I think the last thing that maybe two more things about the extracts that I love. Melville sets up a number of really important themes in these extracts. That is, it's not just random and it's not just exclusively about the whale. As you track through the extracts, you start to see, number one, an association of the whale with God. Right? There's often these passages about the whale's divine origins or his great power, his destructive capacity. There's a number of passages about getting eaten by the whale. So we start to think about Jonah. We start to think about, there are a number of passages that refer to the whale's mouth as a gate. Where does that gate go? What happens when you get eaten by or devoured by the whale? And then one of the most interesting threads you see, I like to say that these are the bowling pins that Melville's setting up. And Melville actually worked setting up bowling pins in Hawaii. So these are the bowling pins, right? One of the most important ones is mutiny. There's a number of really odd references to works about mutinies. Memoirs about mutinies and the history of the such and such a mutiny. As we read the novel, one of the key moments in the book is actually a mutiny, but not a mutiny where the crew overthrows the ship and the captain, but where the captain overthrows the crew and the owners of the ship and takes it for his own purposes. That's Captain Ahab. And so Melville's setting up that kind of ominous threat of mutiny, but then he's going to really surprise us by having the captain be the mutineer. And then the last thing about the extracts is something I already said about etymologies, and that's the democratization of literature and culture and genre that is right alongside passages from Shakespeare and Milton and some of these great, works of natural science and poetry and the scriptures are things like popular songs, just very democratic, very kind of common works of popular literature, popular song that for Melville also have a truth to tell right alongside revealed, sacred scripture or these kind of canonical classical works. He even gives the popular whaling song, the last word. And I'll read that here as we close out this section. He quotes from a whale song, "Oh, the rare old whale mid storm and gale in his ocean home will be, a giant in might where might is right, and king of the boundless sea." I love that line. That's so good. There is no question for Melville about who rules the ocean, and that is the sperm whale.
Much more to come in that book, Moby Dick, but it starts with etymology and extracts, those great moments in this great book. Kelly Scott Franklin, Associate Professor of English at Hillsdale College. Thanks for joining us here on the Radio Free Hillsdale Hour.
Thank you, Scott.
That will wrap up this edition of the Radio Free Hillsdale Hour. Our thanks to Dr. Kathleen O'Toole, Assistant Provost for K-12 Education at Hillsdale College, Corey DeAngelis, his new book, The Parent Revolution, and Dr. Kelly Scott Franklin from Hillsdale's English Department. Remember, you can hear new episodes every week on this station. You also can find extended versions of some of our interviews or listen anytime to the podcast. Find it at podcast.hillsdale.edu or wherever you get your audio. Until next week, I'm Scot Bertram, and this has been the Radio Free Hillsdale Hour.